I joke with my mother sometimes that I got a BS and BS. In architecture school, you learn how to sell your designs, but in reality, it's learning how to think in nonlinear ways. So you learn how to think. You confront a problem and you say, okay, I can either go through it, I can go around it, I can go under it, or I can go over it. And so it's that sort of nonlinear thought process that I think we really excelled at SCAD, and I think to this day they still sort of practice that in their educational program.
This is Inside the Apple Studio, the podcast that details the intersection of architecture and Apple and explores how architects and other design professionals use Apple products in the practice of architecture. With your host, architect Neil Pan. Support for Inside the Apple Studio comes from Monograph. Monograph is the cloud-based practice operations solution built for architects by architects. Learn how Monograph can help you be more productive at monograph.com. Inside the Apple Studio is also supported by Arc IT. Arc IT is an IT provider that specializes in serving Mac and PC-based architecture and design firms. For a free consultation, go to getarcit.com. Welcome to Inside the Apple Studio. I'm excited to have an architect that started his own small firm that specializes in single-family residential and light commercial architecture, design, and construction. A client-focused firm dedicated to providing superb service with attention to detail. I'm pleased to welcome architect Jeremiah Russell to the show. Welcome.
Thanks, Neil.
Hey, well, I really appreciate you joining me for this episode. Let's dive right in. The first question I usually ask guests is, what inspired you to become an architect?
So it's a great question. When I was a kid, a lot of people say, well, I don't know what a lot of people say, but when I was young, there really was only one kind of path. So when I was a kid, my grandmother took me and my mother to the city. The way I remember it, it was New York City. It could have been pretty much any city with tall buildings. But so we went shopping in the city, and I pretty much spent the entire day getting yelled at because I was sticking my head out of the cab looking up at the tall buildings. And, because I was fascinated by these structures that were just so much larger and more impressive than I was. And pretty much tracked through the rest of my life. I was always fascinated with, how are things built? How are they put together? How do they work? And that naturally lended itself to architecture because, honestly, at the end of the day, that's kind of what we do.
So did that lead you to take some drafting classes in high school?
Yeah, so I did take drafting in high school. I guess I was very gifted at it, and so I slept through most of my courses, which is probably not a great way to engender yourself to the graces of your teacher. I got in a lot of trouble for that, but I did good work and I passed the class, so I guess it was all right.
It all worked out.
Yeah.
So then you attended the Savannah College of Art and Design, earning a master's in architecture. Mm-hmm. What made you choose that college?
So I had an art teacher in high school who had two posters up in his class. One was for the Parsons School of Design in Pennsylvania. The other was for the Savannah College of Art and Design in Savannah, Georgia. I actually applied to both through a very interesting quirk of miscommunication. Parsons actually never sent me an application for enrollment, but SCAD did. And so I applied to SCAD. I tried multiple times to apply to Parsons, which is actually where I wanted to go, because of their very design focused program. But SCAD, accepted me, and I spent 5 years in Savannah, probably the 5 most incredible years of my life. And like you said, received both my bachelor's of fine arts and master's in architecture in 2003.
Now, where were you coming from?
So I grew up in South Georgia. I'm originally from upstate New York, but my parents were both civil service. So I grew up in Kings Bay, Georgia, which is one of only 3 nuclear subbases left on or in the United States.
Okay.
So I grew up there, and so Savannah was only about hour and a half away from home. So it was kind of an easy choice.
Now, you mentioned an undergrad or another degree in art and fine arts as well.
Yeah. So SCAD started out as a 5-year professional bachelor's degree. When I was in my 3rd year, we were up for NAB accreditation.
Mm-hmm.
And SCAD had routinely received a 5-year accreditation. It just so happened that this year they were reviewing the previous year's thesis projects and had determined, without SCAD requesting this, that we be transitioned to a master's program. So basically the level of the work that we were providing or that we were creating as students was not, as they determined, a bachelor level program. It was a master's level program. And so they redid the accreditation for the college. And so in our 5th year, when we graduated, we received sort of a dual degree. One was kind of a little bit of BS. It was a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Architecture, but then our actual degree was a Master's of Architecture, which, same as a Bachelor's of Architecture, is a terminal degree, which allowed us to get licensed.
Okay. Wow. So you kind of lucked out being able to get a master's in 5 years instead of 6.
Absolutely. I mean, SCAD, I can't say it enough. It was, like I said, it was the 5 best years of my life, not only living in that city, but being in that environment that it was very, very design focused, but also I joke with my mother sometimes that I got a BS and BS. It's, in architecture school, you learn how to sell your designs, and but in reality, it's learning how to think in nonlinear ways. So you learn how to think. You confront a problem and you say, okay, I can either go through it, I can go around it, I can go under it, or I can go over it. And so it's that sort of nonlinear thought process that I think we really excelled at SCAD, and I think to this day they still sort of practice that in their educational program.
Was there a class or instructor there that influenced you in your career path?
Oh gosh, there were so many. I think the most influential was Lorraine Papagasser, and my God, if she ever listens to this podcast, I will never live it down. She had the distinction of every critique that we had making someone cry.
Oh my!
And it was not because her critiques were that harsh, but they were just that good. Mm. It wasn't so much that you understood just how bad you were, but you just understood there was so much room to grow, so much room to do better. And I really, really loved her critiques and, her level of honesty. And, she was really kind of a bull in a china shop when she would critique work. And from a very early age in my career, I appreciated that, and I wanted more of it. I didn't just want to hear good things. I wanted to be better. As a designer, as a student, and eventually as an architect. And I think she was really most instrumental in me taking those criticisms not as a negative, but really as a positive.
What else about those 5 years made it, in your words, the best years of your life?
I think it was living in a city that was so steeped in history and culture. So our campus, it's not a campus in the classical sense. Like we lived and worked in the city. Our college buildings were spread out all through the downtown. We weren't isolated from the rest of Savannah. We were right in the middle of it. We were a part of the city, whether they wanted us there or not. And going back almost 20 years ago, it was mostly not. Now, obviously, SCAD has much more of a cachet, of a positive reputation, within Savannah, Atlanta, Lacoste, France, Hong Kong. I mean, it is spread worldwide. But prior to that, there were some, I don't know, I would say some negative bias to the students that attended the college, at least within the city of Savannah.
So after you graduated, you worked for a few different firms. Can you take us through some of those early experiences and how that influenced you and how you ended up in Little Rock?
Sure. So the very first firm that I worked for was KBJ Architects in Jacksonville, Florida. KBJ was a very old firm. They actually have the distinction of being the oldest firm in the state of Florida. The original name of the firm was Kemp, Bunch, and Jackson. I believe they started somewhere in the late 1930s, if I'm not mistaken. Might have been earlier than that. But they have the profound distinction within the state of Florida receiving the very first corporate license for an architectural firm in the state. Their corporate license number was actually A00001.
Wow.
Yeah. My boss and mentor, Walter, was is an amazing architect, but he was also a little bit of an eccentric. So one of the stories that I heard sort of around the water cooler was back in the late 70s, early 80s, when they were making the transition from hand drafting to computer drafting with AutoCAD. They had purchased personal computers for all of the architects in the office, and they were working, drawing their lines and rectangles and circles and whatever. And Walter, he was famous for carrying Sharpies in his shirt pocket. And he came over to some architect's desk, and they were, drawing something on the screen, and he was sort of arguing with them about proportion and size. And he's like, no, I don't want it to look like that. I want to make these changes. And to illustrate those changes, he took a Sharpie out of his pocket and drew on the monitor,
right,
in permanent marker to illustrate what he wanted that architect or intern to do. And so the story goes, they went, shortly after that, the principals of the firm went to Walter. Were like, look, we're taking your Sharpies away. You're no longer allowed to have these Sharpies and walk around the studio. But Walter was great. He was really wonderful. He literally took me under his wing and taught me some real fundamentals, not just of sort of the art of architecture, but also the practice of architecture. one thing that he told me, which I'll never forget. I think I was working on a hotel project. I was, all of, I don't know, 20 years old. And I was working on this hotel project, and he came over, and I'm drawing these details, and he's like staring over my shoulder, which, if anybody that works in this profession knows, is just an awful situation to be in. But he's standing like right over my shoulder, and he's looking at what I'm doing. He starts pointing to things like, "What's that? What is that line? What's that doing?" And honestly, I had no idea. I was like, I don't know. I'm just trying to make this work. And I'll never forget, he said to me, "Don't ever draw, whether it's paper or a computer. I don't care how you're drawing it. Don't ever draw a line unless you know what it is, what it does, and how it relates to everything else that's around it." And that really stuck with me even today. Because as architects, technology is great. We can design in 3D, and now we have all these capabilities. But at the end of the day, if you can't take a pencil and a piece of paper and convey an idea, a three-dimensional reality on it in a two-dimensional surface, you're really not going to be successful. I mean, you really have to hold on to that. Know what it is, what it does, and how it relates to everything else around it. And that's something pretty profound that I've carried with me all, for almost 20 years now.
What took you to a firm in Florida after going to school in Georgia?
Sure. So that was family. I met my wife in Jacksonville, Florida, and my in-laws had moved from Jacksonville to Kansas City, I guess around about 2008, early 2009, after my son was born. And after a couple of years there, Jacksonville saw a steep downturn in work. I went from working full-time for a firm to working part-time, and then to contract work.
Mm.
And so this was 2000, 2010, 2011, 2012. And, it was really tough. My daughter was born in 2009, and, we're sort of a young family, and it was just not a great professional work environment in Jacksonville. And so we were originally looking to move to Kansas City to be closer to family. And, I was on the AIA jobs board and saw a listing for a job in Little Rock, Arkansas. And I'll be honest, I had to look up where Arkansas was. I mean, my geography is awful. But I was like, where the hell is Arkansas?
Yeah.
And it's just so happens it's just south of Missouri. So I was like, oh, okay. And the listing was for project architect or project manager with, someone with the ability to get licensed. While I was in the middle of taking my exams. And so I applied, but the reason that I applied is the firm that I came here to work for specialized in historic preservation. And until that time, that was something that I had never really done. I'd pretty much done everything else. I had done residential. I had done, hospitality. I had done education. I had done aviation. I had done, institutional, ecclesiastical, you name it, except for historic preservation. It was always something that I was interested in. And so I applied, and we drove up here. We interviewed, not just me, but, me and the kid and the wife and the kids. We all drove up here to interview and to make sure that it was a good fit, because, obviously moving from Florida to Arkansas, that's a big deal. And when we were here, we really just fell in love with Little Rock and with Arkansas. For me personally, it truly is the best kept secret in the Union. Arkansas is known as the natural state, which means we have lots of parks, mountains, rivers, lakes. I mean, there's, if you're an outdoors person like me, there's plenty to do. I mean, I've lived here for almost 10 years and I still haven't seen it all. So that's really what brought us up. And once we got here, we just didn't want to leave.
Now, you came there to work for another firm.
Yes, we did.
But now you have your own firm. So How did that transition happen?
Yeah, so it was sort of an unfortunate transition. I thought I was kind of moving here to be part of something to help grow it. Unfortunately, when I got licensed, the firm that I was working for, my boss, we'd had several conversations about, me taking on more leadership roles and sort of growing with the firm, that kind of thing. But as things happen, that just didn't work out. The firm that I was working for merged with another firm that I really didn't want to work for. And so for a very brief period, only about 6 months, I went to work for a larger firm here in Arkansas, one of the oldest in the state, as a matter of fact, which was interesting, sort of going back to my first firm, KBJ. Very large corporate firm, corporate environment, you're in a cubicle. That's what you do, sit there, do your job. But I was also moonlighting at the time, which, everybody knows, every architect does. And the moonlighting was starting to sort of bleed into the daylighting. And, I was working probably 6 days a week, 16 hours a day, and I was just killing myself. And so I kind of sat down with my wife one day. I was like, look, something's got to give. We either need to, just take the jump and do this on our own, or I need to give up all this side work and just work at this firm. And, eventually maybe one day I'll work my way up through the ranks and just have to be content with that. And, I'll never forget my wife. She kind of looked at me. She's like, no, I think you need to do this. Like, it's, it's time. The time is right. Obviously she wanted to support me in what I wanted to do, but it was really her leap of faith that led us to this. And, next month, in November, middle of November, will be 7 years since we had that conversation. And I haven't regretted a single moment of it yet.
Did you think you were ready to have your own firm when you did it?
Hell no. Nobody's ready. That's like asking somebody who's a guy who's about to become a father, hey, you ready to be a parent?
Very true.
No, I'm not ready to be a parent. I have no idea what I'm doing. This is like, if you want the ultimate on the job training, start a business.
Oh, that's so true. That's so true. So what were some of the difficulties that you encountered right off the bat?
Oh, shit. Insurance, what's an LLC? What's the right corporate structure for me? I'm sure there's, 10,000 blog posts about that. How to bill, like how to separate your finances. I mean, my gosh, the list is legion and legendary.
Yeah.
I'm still learning, 7 years into this, I'm still figuring things out. I think that's simultaneously part of the excitement, but also, it's a little bit terrifying to think about, but, really keeps me motivated and keeps me going day to day.
Now, you named your firm Rogue Architecture. Mm-hmm. What inspired that name?
Well, so early in my career, I made a conscious decision to not spend all of my time in one firm. So in the first 5 years of practice, I worked for 5 different firms. A lot of employment experts out there will tell you that's a horrible idea. Having that kind of sporadic employment history is not good. It doesn't look good to future employees and that kind of thing. For whatever reason, for me, it worked really well. I worked for 5 really incredible firms in my first 5 years of practice. I learned so many things, had great mentors at every single firm, learned so much about not just the art of architecture, but the business and the practice and the engineering side of architecture, the nuts and bolts, the things that aren't sexy, the things that aren't pretty, the things that most of us don't really learn until we're either in a leadership position or we start our own firm. I was very fortunate to be able to learn some of those things very early on. Working at those different firms, I kind of started making a mental list. Think of it as like a do's and don'ts, because there was never any doubt that eventually I was either going to be partner or I was going to start my own firm. Like, those were really the only 2 options. That was my trajectory. And so working at these firms, I kind of started, just looking around at, different management styles, different practice styles, and even different partners within those different firms. Like, how do partners work together, and how do they differ in their practice styles and things like that. I paid attention to the people that were around me, especially in leadership positions. And so when I got to the point where it was time to hang my own shingle, I wanted to do things differently. I didn't want to have the sort of tried and true model of how to start an architecture firm. You hang a shingle, you hire interns, you have staff, you have an office, you raise up this this gargantuan overhead that you now have to maintain. I wanted to do things differently. I wanted to build relationships as a firm with other firms. I wanted to kind of build my business in a way that I could leverage other firms and let those firms leverage me. And so early on, I worked with some other architects. As a matter of fact, most of my projects came from former bosses. I think the first 2 years, that is mostly where my clients came from, was other architects who were like, "Hey, you need to talk to this guy." And I'm very grateful for that. I still maintain most of those relationships, and most of those architects are still some of my best friends. And so that's kind of where Rogue came from. I just wanted to do something different. And the definition of Rogue, if you really dive into it, is someone who lives outside of the norm, someone who's not afraid to break barriers, to push the envelope, to kind of stand outside the box and look in and say, is this really the way that we should be doing things? And that's really the way I want to practice. I want to focus not just on the architecture, but also on the human experience of, what is the buildings that I'm creating? What is it really like to be in those spaces? And how does it make the experience through my design better?
That sounds a little bit like the philosophy that you talk about on your website, your philosophy and approach to architecture. And can you talk a little bit also about what you mean by a client-focused firm?
Sure. So the reason that I've focused on mostly single-family residential, custom homes, remodels, historic preservation, but also small commercial projects, is because I want to work with the end user. So when I say client focused, I'm focused on the experience of those that are actually going to use the building that we design. So, and this is, it's not a critique, it's not a knock at larger firms that do larger projects. There's a place for that. There's a lane for that, but it's not me. What I want to focus on is how what is the experience of being in one of my buildings going to be like? And I want it to be as enjoyable, as uplifting, as enriching as possible. Whether it's a historic remodel, or it's a new custom home, or it's a retail space in a strip mall, I want to think about and be able to think about, to have that freedom to think about what these people's lives are going to be like in that space. Passive heating and cooling, natural ventilation, natural daylighting, circulation. Are the spaces that I'm designing, are they sympathetic to the human body? Like, are people going to feel comfortable in this space? Are they going to feel welcomed? Are they going to feel invited and able to freely move within these spaces? I think that's really at the core of what I want to do.
Do you have a checklist?
I do not. I probably should.
You just listed off about 6 things. I'm thinking, does he have a checklist to make sure every one of those happened on his designs?
Yeah. And if I ever wrote it down, it would probably be the death of me. I really take each new project as a new and interesting challenge. It's not necessarily formulaic. Some projects, let's be honest, they're a little bit more pedestrian than others. They have a very finite sort of program, and there's a very limited sort of skill set that's required to make it successful. But sometimes those few projects come along where you're really able to kind of spread your wings and flex your muscles as an architect and a designer. And you find those opportunities, those small opportunities to design and design well.
So you've mentioned a number of different project types that you've worked on. Do you have a favorite?
Favorite, I don't know. Maybe it is a good term. I would say historic preservation is probably one of my most favorite, or the projects that I get the most excited about, for a few reasons. One, you're dealing with an existing structure, but you're also dealing with an existing structure that has a quality and a character that needs to be respected, and honored in a way that's different from, let's say, you take a strip center, or some other commercial, sort of modern commercial space that's just being renovated for the umpteenth time. Historic architecture is a little bit of a different animal. You have to understand its place and time, when it was built, how it was built, which I think is the most important. And that investigation is really fascinating for me, because you're taking a step back in time, and you're trying to put yourself in the minds of the architects and the contractors that designed and built this thing that's still there, that is still there from a time probably before you were born. I'm not that old. I'm only 41. Like most historic structures have been here since before I was born. And so, those types of projects that I'm working on, I'm dealing with construction technologies that are, can be 100 years or more old. But then I've got to apply kind of modern design sensibilities, a modern program to that building, whether it's an office, whether it's a retail space, whether it's somebody's home. And there's kind of there's a balance there, and then obviously there's some, bureaucratic red tape with National Park Service and, State Historic Preservation Office and, Secretary of the Interior's standards for rehabilitation, all that kind of thing. Those are more, that's more sort of, detailed programmatic stuff. design can operate sort of outside and within that simultaneously. But yeah, it's those historic projects that I really love working on. It's the limitations that an existing structure, especially an existing historic structure, place on design, I think give you real opportunity for creativity, unlike just having a blank slate. And that's something that I truly enjoy doing.
Well, this month you're relaunching with a new website and some other initiatives. Can you share with the listeners what you're doing and what inspired you to do it and
Yep.
what you hope to gain from it?
Sure. So we had kind of started off the summer or the end of the summer with the intent of relaunching all three of our companies, so Rogue Architecture, Rogue Construction, and Rogue Community Development, with new websites, new logo. We've sort of pulled back from that a little bit. It was all supposed to coincide with the anniversary of our 7th year in business, which is in November. We've kind of taken a step back from that. We still have the three companies, and we're still working on those things, but really it's turned into just a celebration of our 7 years in business. And so we're gonna invite out to our office. We're gonna open our office to the public. We're gonna have past clients, current clients, contractors, product vendors, pretty much everybody that we've ever worked with in the last 7 years. We're going to invite them out and just have just kind of a little party and a celebration at our office to just kind of commemorate. I mean, 7 years is a lot. Some people don't think that's a lot, but when you open a firm in your mid 30s, with a wife and 2 kids, that's scary. And to now be able to look back 7 years on and have more than reasonable prospects to look 7 years and more in the future, that's kind of a big deal. So, we really just want to celebrate that and say thank you to a lot of people. And yeah, it's going to be a pretty good party.
Well, that's quite an accomplishment. I mean, 7 years on your own, that's fantastic. So looking at your career so far, if you had to look back, how has the reality of the profession been different from where you thought it would be when you first started out?
So, Neil, that is an interesting question. When I first interviewed at KBJ, my future boss at the time asked me a question. He said, "What do you think about the business of architecture?" I was fresh out of college. I didn't know what the hell I was talking about. I'm sure I gave some sort of platitudes, this utopian view of architecture and how we change the world and shape the future and all this other crap. And, he just kind of looked at me, he smiled, and, I got the job, thankfully. But I remember at my 1-year review at the same firm, I sat down in his office. He asked me the same question. He's like, "So you've been here a year. What do you think about the business of architecture?" And I looked at him with a straight face and I said, the business of architecture is hard. And they do not prepare you for the business of architecture in college. And I still stand by that today. When I talked earlier about, I'm still learning things about the business of architecture. It's always changing. There's technology, there's obviously there are laws that change. You got to deal with workers' comp, you got to deal with errors and omissions insurance, you got to deal with all this stuff. It's not creative, it's not sexy. A lot of times being in business, it's answering phone calls, answering emails, going out to job sites to meet contractors and telling them why they've screwed that up and how they need to fix it. But at the end of the day, there's really nothing else that I would rather do. The art, the engineering, and the business of architecture, they're all sort of tangled up together in this joy of designing and building things. And that's really what I hold on to on a day-to-day basis.
Well, let's take a quick short break. And after, let's explore a little bit more about your Mac experience right after this. Architects, how do you manage your firm? Are you using dated and clunky software? Are you frustrated using different spreadsheets and never really getting a clear view of the status of your projects? Then let me tell you about Monograph, because they can help. Monograph is online software that is designed by architects for architects. It allows you to track your time, your projects, and your budgets. It can not only track all of this, but it can do it all in real time. Monograph has an awesome tool called Money Gantt. With it, you can immediately see whether you are under or over budget on a project. Monograph also comes with a tool called Resource, which allows you to reallocate your team's time and track its impact on your remaining budget. Using this powerful tool, you can easily adjust your projects on a week-to-week basis. Can your dated and clunky software do that? Monograph makes this easy. Check out all the ways Monograph can help your firm be more productive at monograph.com and be proactive with Monograph. As business owners and architects, how often do we think about our IT provider? Typically, only when things go wrong. For many of us, unfortunately, this happens too often, especially with the latest emphasis on remote work. I know I've had to deal with my fair share of IT fire drills. It's not a pleasant experience, and clearly I wasn't dealing with an IT provider like ArcIT. ArcIT is a different kind of company. They specialize in serving Mac and PC-based architecture and design firms. This means they understand your Mac-related challenges of keeping your personal and your business data separate and have experience providing solutions when certain software providers stop supporting Mac OS. Combine this with industry-leading response times, proactive remote hardware management, solid disaster recovery and backup solutions, and enterprise-grade security management. And yet, all of the above are just table stakes for a solid IT company. ArcIT goes a step further. They become your strategic partner when it comes to planning, budgeting, and integrating new technology into your business. All of this sounds expensive, right? Not with ArcIT. Because ArcIT is highly specialized for our industry, their pricing is on par, or in some cases even lower, than other IT providers. ArcIT is transparent and publishes its pricing on its website. Your business deserves a competent, responsive, and proactive IT partner. Reach out to Boris, ArcIT's founder and CEO, for a free consultation. Go to getarcit.com and click Work with Us. Welcome back, everyone. Jeremiah, you've taken us through your architectural journey. Now let's discuss how you started using a Mac and eventually other Apple products. Where were you first exposed to the Mac, and what was the first Mac you used or owned?
Yep. So the first Mac that I used was when I moved to Arkansas and started working for the firm that I came here to work for, Ruby Architects. They were a Mac-based office. And the software that they used was called PowerCAD, which is a 2D only software. It's Mac-based. I think it's mostly defunct now. But and prior to that, I mean, I was, like most people, I was a PC junkie. I mean, my very first computer was a Tandy 1000, way back in the 80s. And so Mac was a completely foreign world to me when I moved to Arkansas. But as happens a lot of time, you sort of work with what you're given, and so I just did. It was a 27-inch iMac. So this is 2012 when I moved here, and I had an iPhone, and so it just seemed like sort of a natural transition. iPhone, iMac, why not? They talk to each other well. and just sort of dove right in and didn't look back.
What was that experience like after spending a number of years using a PC? I assume probably using AutoCAD to have to make the transition to a different platform and a different CAD software.
So in terms of CAD software, um, it was really just learning the keys, the shortcut keys. So, when years ago when I worked in AutoCAD, I didn't have any icons on my desktop. I just used shortcut keys to do everything because I'd been doing it so long and knew them all. And so it was really just a matter of learning what those shortcut keys are, so that I could do my job as efficiently as possible. Going back to my old mentor, Walter, he said, the computer is no different than a pencil and paper. It's just a more sophisticated tool. You just need to know how to use it and use it to full advantage. And so, I've worked in AutoCAD, I've worked in DataCAD, I've worked in PowerCAD, I've worked in Revit, I've worked in Vectorworks. I worked in ArchiCAD for a very little bit. And they're all just tools. The computer is a tool. As sophisticated as it is, it's still just a tool. Despite its power as a tool, it still can't think as fast as the human mind can. And so it's up to us to simply learn how to use it to full advantage. For me, Apple products, the way I describe it is, unlike PC, there's one button. You press it and it just works. It sort of takes the guesswork out of it for you. For as long as I've been using Apple products, I've never once seen the blue screen of death. Thank God.
So you're working for this firm using PowerCAD. Did you work for somebody else beforehand? And if not, what made you want to use a Mac for when you started Rogue and went on your own?
Mostly because I already had one at home, so it was easy. So when I was working for that firm, Ruby Architects, we were in the process of making a transition to BIM. So this is 2012, 2013. And, obviously Revit's at that point had been around for a number of years, but obviously not Mac-based. And so my boss, he's like, hey, we want to make this transition. So it's your job to go out there and find a software that we can use that is Mac-based. And I said, okay. And so, I did what any reasonably intelligent person does. I reached out to the people in my circle. At that point, it was a social media circle, and it was Lee Callisti who came back and told me about Vectorworks. He's like, hey, I've been using it for years. It's great. It's Mac-based, but I use it on a PC. It's cross-platform, yada, yada, yada. And I at the time, I had been looking into ArchiCAD, but the cost of it was, and still is, substantial. And so I downloaded a trial, but then I also downloaded a trial of Vectorworks. And it just seemed a little bit more intuitive, a little bit more user-friendly. And just so, if you think of the learning curve, it was just a little bit more shallow. It wasn't quite so steep. And so we purchased it as an office, and we started with one project. It was actually a single family house for a contractor, and just, literally overnight made the jump and just figured it out. It took about 3 months to sort of figure out the basic ins and outs. But we made it work. We built a beautiful house, and just sort of went forward from there. So when I went out on my own, Vectorworks is what I was most, I don't want to say it's what I was most familiar with, but it was, for what I wanted to do, it was the most comfortable. And because it was Mac based, it sort of made the transition more easy for me. So one of the things that I learned about Apple products sort of early on is that though the cost of entry is a little higher than PC, the utility, the length of utility that you get out of the product is so much longer that the cost is actually cheaper. So, when I bought my first iMac, that computer lasted, and it was used when I bought it. That computer lasted, I think 3 years. So it was 6 or 7 years old, and it unfortunately just sort of, one day just decided I'm not going to work anymore. And, I literally had, like, I was in panic mode. I took it down to the Apple store. I was like, please fix my computer, get it to work again. They were like, yeah, there's nothing we can do. I was like, okay, well, I'm leaving with another computer. So, just go get one and give it to me, please. And I've always used Mac products since.
What other applications or services do you use to manage the rest of your practice beyond using Vectorworks just for your CAD work?
So most everything that we use, obviously nowadays, is cloud-based. So our financial software is cloud-based. We use Dropbox for file sharing and Office database stuff. I use iNotes almost exclusively for all sorts of things, jotting down notes while I'm on a project site, to even sketching, details. If I'm somewhere where I just happen to have my iPad and my pencil, and I just kind of, sketch something out. I use Morpholio, which is great on the iPad. I use, what else?
How about from a project management side? Do you use anything specifically to kind of manage your projects?
So project management has been one area where I have struggled to find something that works well, or rather works more intuitively. So I've used Zoho Projects before, which is, it's sort of project management, but it's more project scheduling, like milestones and to-do lists and things like that. I've used Asana. I've used Slack. Again, they're all cloud-based. But yeah, I've really struggled to find something that's truly unique to architects, especially, something that doesn't cost, thousands of dollars a year.
Right.
Because, that's the struggle of all small firms, is that barrier to entry.
Yeah. What about for marking up PDFs? Because I know Bluebeam's not currently available on the Mac.
Oh, God, man, I love Bluebeam. I used Bluebeam for years. And then, as a matter of fact, Bluebeam was supported on the Mac up until about, I don't know, 2015, 2016, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
And then they were just like, whatever, we don't care about Mac users anymore. And that was disappointing. Mostly I use Preview, for signing documents and things like that. But honestly, I've been using Acrobat, which I absolutely hate. But to be able to quickly mark up a document, it's pretty good, like a Word document, or text-based. But actually, the one app that I've found the most success with for redlining is Morpholio. It's depending on the DPI of your PDF, it can be a little grainy, with the lines. But you can import an entire project set and go from page to page, redline it, and then export the entire thing as a single PDF, which is really helpful. So that's been I think that's probably been one of the most helpful apps that I've really tried to take a lot more advantage of in recent months.
What's your favorite thing about using a Mac and other Apple devices?
The hardware, it just works. Period.
Yeah, can't argue with that.
Yeah, like I don't ever have to pull up a C prompt ever. You know, there's so many people out there that have no idea what that is.
Yeah, yeah. Or it's on the C drive or the D drive or the E
Yeah.
drive or the F drive. That just makes no sense to me either.
Yep. Yep.
Although it's something I have to deal with every day. But anyway,
Bless your heart.
I wasn't lucky enough to find a firm that is a Mac-based firm like you were.
Yeah.
You know,
I
or
created one.
that's true. So, what advice would you give the listeners if they're considering using a Mac in their practice?
Um, I would say don't let the cost of entry deter you, because the utility is worth far more than the cost. So, for example, obviously everything I own is Apple. I've got, I'm recording this podcast from a MacBook Pro. My kids all have iPads. They have iPhones. I have an iPhone. I've got an iMac sitting on my desk in the office. As a matter of fact, I'm very excited about the fact that Apple today,
As we record this, yes.
has released the 16-inch MacBook Pro with the M1 processor. I will, as a matter of fact, as soon as we're done recording this, I'm probably going to order two.
Oh my, okay.
Yeah. And that's because I want the flexibility of being able to go to a more remote or not being bound by the office.
Sure.
Not being chained to a desk. I want my intern to be able to take days off, but take the laptop with her and still be productive. So those types of things are important. I know you can do the same thing with PC, but I think the flexibility, the interconnectivity of the Apple products is so seamless across devices that PC just really can't keep up with it. And I think that's one thing that Apple has done really well. And I hope they keep doing it.
Well, Jeremiah, I appreciate you sharing your Apple and Mac experience. But before we wrap up this segment, I want you to share with the audience one app, utility, or service that you find most useful.
Most useful. I'm going to go back to Morpholio. They are really great. So not just in for sketching, digital sketching, but really the red lines, the flexibility of being able to import PDFs and notate them in real time is really critical to how I practice, especially lately that I'm doing a lot more traveling for my work. Rather than trying to carry a bunch of drawings and a red pen and get it all done, I could just pull up my iPad and just start going to town, and I can make it red, blue, or green, or yellow, or whatever I want.
It seems to be a very popular app. I've had a few guests recommend it.
It is, and their mood board. So if you're into interior design or creating sort of conceptual boards to, well, for lack of a better term, to create a mood or to present a mood, it's really great. They link with a lot of furniture and fixture manufacturers, so you can actually download those images directly from the internet and sort of present them to a client, which is really helpful.
Well, to close out this episode, let's move to our final segment, the 10 questions. So the first question is, what is your favorite word?
Conundrum.
What's your least favorite word?
And.
What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Uh, Creatively, people. Uh, Spiritually and emotionally, children.
What turns you off?
Ignorance.
What sound or noise do you love?
Children laughing.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Fluorescent lights.
What is your favorite curse word?
Multifaceted, multifunctional.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
U.S. Marshal, but I'm aged out. I found out recently, which is unfortunate.
What profession would you not like to do?
Oh gosh, politician.
If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
My man.
All right. Well, Jeremiah, I want to thank you for joining me on this episode of Inside the Apple Studio. Please let the listeners know where they can find you online and the best way to contact you.
Sure. Our website is www.roguearch, that's roguearch.com. They can contact me through our website or by phone. My office line is 501-260-7506. And we always answer the phone.
That'll be a nice change.
Yeah. I know, right?
Well, thanks again, Jeremiah. I appreciate you joining me.
Awesome. Neil, this is such a pleasure. I can't wait to do it again.
I look forward to it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Inside the Apple Studio. I'd like to thank Monograph and Arc IT for their support. You can also support the show by telling a friend and show them how to follow it in their favorite podcast player. If you have comments on the show, you can find me on Twitter at NPANN or at Apple for Arc. That's Apple, FORARCH. You can also comment on the Apple for Architects Facebook page and join the Apple for Architects Facebook group. Inside the Apple Studio is a production of Apple for Architects at appleforarchitects.com. Oh, shoot. I'm forgetting what it was. But I was like, yeah, I had that exact same experience. That's right. Drawing the lines. When you were talking about, what is this line? I had that exact same experience when I was younger. And I have said that to other younger architects going, younger kids out of school and just working for me. I'm like, what is that line? Do you know what that is? You need to know what it is. Don't fucking draw it unless you know what it is.
Yeah. And, by the way, gravity is a thing.